Just want to officially welcome everyone to today's part 2 in a 2-part series that began way back on January the 26th with our friends at the FDA. We are going to spend the majority of today's session on answering questions that you asked upon registration submittal today. So again, we're going to focus the majority of today's webinar on answering the questions that you want answers to from the FDA, from Ken, an industry expert with CSA, as well as our friends at Compliance Group, Khaled and Stevens. Okay, real quick. Cisco Vicente from the FDA, welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for being here.
How you guys doing?
Ken Shitamoto, Gilead Sciences, industry CSA expert, welcome as well.
Morning.
Stephen Cook, validation CSA expert from Compliance Group, welcome as well.
Hello.
And then certainly last but not least, our moderator for today's lively discussion, Mr. Khaled Musali. I am going to pass the baton to you, sir.
We'll move on right away to discuss or really get into the questions that you've been asking. And I want to make sure that we will not be talking too much about what is CSA. By now, I'm hoping and I'm assuming that everyone listening to us understand what CSA is, and really the objective is how we're going to implement it, right? That's number one. Number two, how is data integrity is going in and out of CSA? Can we apply CSA to data integrity? You know, some questions around data integrity. The one thing I want to apologize for, and we would have had her, Karen Takahashi from the FDA. Unfortunately, she had a last-minute conflict and she could not join us. So I do just want to appreciate her for joining us in the last meeting. But her message to me was that Cisco Vicente will cover all the questions that are going to Karen about data integrity related to computerized systems. Last time, back in January 26th, we had a CSA poll and a data integrity poll going. And one of the questions we had, when will you start implementing CSA? And the other one, if unsure or no plans, what is preventing you from adopting CSA? So I just wanted to share this with you because I have a feeling not everyone here today was in the last webinar. So these are good numbers, encouraging numbers, right? So when will you start implementing CSA? As a matter of fact, we had about 572 attendees, 387 responded, right? Immediately, we got 19%, right? That's not bad. This year, 2021, this is a good year, quote unquote, 26%. Unsure, 47%. That's a little bit concerning. No plans is 7%. I'm happy to see that number because really the objective is we want everyone to move to CSA. Stop thinking, oh, sorry, time up. One of the questions that you're going to ask me now or later, and Cisco's going to tell you now what it is. When is the FDA draft guidance? We don't know. There's no recent update from my perspective, and I'm personally past that. Cisco, just if you can answer that question because I know what's coming up. So when is the FDA draft guidance going to be released?
I appreciate the idea that you've already said that you're past that because I think you know, we've been on that bandwagon for a while that, you know, this is stuff that can be done, implemented without that. We get the need for the guidance, we get the need for clarity, but it is moving along. It is getting it's got its priority going on now. It did hit its delays because of the EUAs and the transition into a new administrative team, you know, in the government there. So that always puts a delay on things, but this one's got its interest and its traction, and it's moving through upper levels of its clearance process. It's now just time.
Great, thank you, Cisco. The other question was, if unsure or no plans, what is preventing you from adopting CSA? Need help implementing? 39%, that's great. Call us, call somebody else, call anybody you want. Just please get to it, okay? Listen to all of our webinars, all of the feedback, all the case studies. If you can't put it together, we can help you. Reach out to a friend, but start doing something this year, please. This quarter is hasn't ended yet. Waiting for others. Why? Why waiting for others? You want to be a copycatter or you want to be an early adopter, right? Resistance from QA, which is good. That's 9%. I'm happy with that. That means QA has an open mind. And yes, QA will have an open mind. Resistance from CSV, 7%. Resistance from management. This is a great number. If your management is supporting it, what are you waiting for, right? All right, enough of that. Moving on. Companies that implemented CSA between 2017, not just to 2020, from 2017 till 2021 today. All right, there's over 60 companies that we're aware of. We just put a bunch of them here that we know of and we've helped. Okay, so look at these companies that you're looking at. Gilead, Mr. Ken Shitamori here, Boston Sci, Fresenius, all these companies, the respectful billion-dollar companies, and yet they're moving toward that direction. Why? Because CSA makes sense, right? All right. I'm not going to talk about CSA. Remember, this is an important slide because these are the important people. Ken, myself, and Cisco are one of them. And it's really important to give credit for these folks. We meet on a regular basis every Friday and talk about things and come up with ideas, come up with a recommendation. Now, remember, these recommendations went into the draft guidance, right? It's not the FDA writing it on its own. Cisco is helping us, is leading us. He's the coordinator, but it's really the industry. So again, it goes back to the industry. What do you want, right? What do you want? The regulators will help us. And Cisco, you probably have something to say about this, how regulators are not the barriers, right? Sometimes we are the barriers, the barrier for ourselves. If you want to say something here, Cisco.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's key here, right? The work here that has been done and what's really been great about this is a group of industry people getting together and really working through what has been a pain point within the industry. What we've seen and what we've been able to do on our end from an FDA side is learn and understand the impact of what this was having and what do we need to then do on our end to maybe help move things along or shift the dynamic. But you know, honestly, end of the day, it always boils down to the solutions are in your hands, right? We're only able to respond to what we hear and what we know. And if we're not seeing or hearing feedback or looking or seeing or hearing or learning from alternatives, things continue on the same way they've always been. So I think this is a great example of how, you know, there is no need to necessarily always wait for the regulator to drive that change.
Great, thank you, Cisco. And there's a link here on Join the FICSA LinkedIn. There's always updates. Can always write responses here for questions. So please join us, and Stephen. So please join that group. Moving on, sorry. And we're not gonna talk about it. Of course, I'm assuming everyone on the call right now is aware of the GPG, Data Integrity by Design, and the CSA appendix. We are the lucky ones actually to be able to co-author that, the CSA appendix. And please go ahead and purchase it for your company if you have not. I'm not going to talk too much about it. Next step. Oops. Okay, data integrity poll. Data integrity, what are your areas of biggest concerns? Do you understand the data lifecycle of GXP data and the relationship to computerized systems? Here are the answers. I'm not going to go through them all. Just wanted to share them with you. All right. And really now I want to get to some of those question and answers. And I know we've answered those questions before. All right. We're going to keep an eye on any questions coming in. If anything related to those, we'll ask it again. But we have some new questions that I really want to start with them, with the team, and start asking. So the very first question that we have: what is the FDA plan to change the CSV world to match the IT speed of revolution in terms of DevOps and Agile? So I think this is going to my friend, Mr. Cisco Vicente.
Actually, and this even just issuing the this guidance and getting it out, going out there and talking about these ideas and principles is a starting point, right? It's really where we are initiating that that shift and transition. The real work comes, you know, a lot afterwards and once we get going. But this is the foundation, right? Without this, and this is something that we learned when we start engaging going along these topics down the road. You know, that additional and everything else that goes on doesn't really matter, right? Because people still can't get past the hurdle, get the technologies implemented, get everything else, the practices applied and everything that goes along with it, so that we can help on our end or shift that. But going back to the original discussion that we had just a few minutes ago, right? This doesn't have to wait for us. This is something that industry can move ahead with and you know, share with us, and we will then work and integrate that into how we consider things or drive practices surrounding that piece. That's, again, I want to hit that because it is the foundation. We need to get this mindset shifted and moving and rolling. The other piece of that is the, you know, CDRH launched recently their Digital Health Center of Excellence, and that is tackling everything digital, right? What are the practices? What are the concerns? What are the questions that need to be answered? What should we be looking at? Not just in terms of CDRH related stuff, again, for the agency, right? How are we going to be proactive about that future lean? So that's another aspect of what the agency is really trying to do to drive a rethinking of how things get done or how do we get approached and make sure that that's a little bit more understood and accepted in terms of practice from a regulatory standpoint.
Awesome. Ken, from an industry perspective, what's your thought on that?
You know, I mean, I don't look to the FDA to give me that.
Oh,
I mean, I'm gonna be honest there. I mean, it's I don't think Cisco, you care. In all honesty, whether I do it using DevOps or not. End of day, does it work for me as a company? Do I have the ability, right, to have the assurance? And you know, we use this analogy in an article that's coming out this month for American Pharmaceutical Review. Just to plug there, because we do cover a lot of CSA fallacies, and we do explain why it's okay to use it, and we address multiple things there. So I think it's coming out this week, so you may want to look at it. But the reality is this: is we are the ones who are constraining ourselves. If you really look at what's in guidance, they're not specifying, they're not telling us to do all these onerous processes. And if we are able to demonstrate, right, using our life cycle, whatever that life cycle may be, that the system is in a state of control, that it is okay. It's kind of like the airline pilot. I'm flying my airplane. I got the passengers, whether I have passengers or cargo, as long as I get me to the end point, it's all good. So I get there from the inspection period. That's like, you know, the cargo, right? I get there, it's okay as long as I land that plane. So as long as it's fit for my purpose, everything else is a byproduct of that. So the point is, are you comfortable explaining? Are you comfortable? Right? You know, look at scope and application. You should have a documented, justified, you know, rationale. We already have that flexibility to go DevOps. We have that flexibility. In fact, industry has this strange nuance when they have, when things are higher risk, we take bigger, well, I guess when we have less data, we take bigger risks unconsciously in the name of validation. So you do a impact assessment based testing because, you know, some software like SAP releases a new patch, you read the release notes and you say like, hey, these are the things that are changing, I'm going to do it at a high level. And the DevOps cycle where you have better control because you're seeing it in all the sprints and you know right then and there what's changing, you can make a better impact assessment and narrow and tailor your approach more narrowly at that point. And the one thing I want to caution on people, you know, going down this whole DevOps, you know, there's a lot of tools, ancillary tools that are part of that life cycle. If there's not an explicit predicate rule for that tool, there is no need to validate or qualify that tool. right? Now you want to test it. You want to make sure it works for your needs, for your business purposes. But I caution people who keep using this term validation light. That's like saying cancer light. I mean, you just automatically lump it into another class. No, stop, because once you say it's cancer, you treat it with, you think of chemotherapy, you think of death, you think of everything. Similarly, when we think of validation, we think screenshot, we think all these onerous rituals. When the reality is I need to make sure that I test it and it works. So it's taking that step back, right? And so I think, Khaled, you kind of, on this document here, this is a good primer on what CSA is. This actually, in partnership with GAMP, is CSA on steroids, I would say, because I think it goes a little further than what will be in the guidance document in the end, because this was done in collaboration with GAMP. And there were numerous conversations about some problems that GAMP had with people blindly applying 3x3 tables and shutting off their brain. And so there are different things in here, and this is like a reference model. Right? This will go so far, you can go further, you can go less. When the guidance comes out, that is just a reference model. You need to implement something that works for you. So back to the whole thing, right? I don't think it's on us. It has always been on us and our ability to defend it. If you want to explain your rationale by giving a stack of screenshots, you're not going to move forward. You're not going to be able to adopt these tools. If you want to be able to have a documented,
I think, Ken, it's a great point that it's not a GXP system. These are tools. And I think one of the problems is there's a lot of organizations out there that are still using the old GXP questionnaire that says, does the system support control, yada, 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 right? And that support control is so vague and so nebulous. And by design, back 20 years ago, it made sense, right? We were trying to understand Part 11. We were trying to understand what was applicable. Really, I want to see people move to, is it a system of record for that GXP record type? Move away from that support control. We should not be validating DevOps.
Concur. And last but not least, our friend John Murray, he's retired FDA, and he worked with us on the recommendation for the draft guidance. He said one thing: don't do nothing, do something, right? Basic assurance is always appreciated. That's all you need to do. Keep that word in mind, basic assurance. All right, gentlemen, next question. Looks like it's going to the FDA too. How can we start implementing CSA guidelines into our process, and how flexible the future FDA authority audits will be?
So,
I mean, we're saying really the same thing here, but
process, right? That's always been the question that we get. And I go back to even just Ken's reference right now. One thing to note, and it's correct, right? We say this all the time within the confines of our quality activities. The best practice is really the practice that's relevant for your organization, right? So what you need to do is go back and just simply start, where is it that you are establishing the activities and controls for your computer system efforts, for your, the work required, the identification of what tools are, and start there. And you don't have to do it for everything, right? If it's something that your organization is not fully comfortable with just gunning into, pilot it, start with a small thing. But that idea of how to start and best start, there's lots of other people who've got experiences and expertise out there that you can engage with. If you want some individual feedback on changes you're making, we're here at the agency and we can help take a look at some of the changes you're proposing, what you're looking to do, and give you any feedback on that end. With regards to that propagating through the rest of like the inspection models and everything that we do from an FDA side, that's already started. We're already working through that. We're already trying to get that message out internally and get some of that training built up internally. When the guidance comes out, we'll just have that amplified. It's going to take time to get through and work through its practice. And even internally, we've heard feedback that there is interest and support for this from the investigators, simply because it helps clarify to them what is important and what they should be looking for.
Thank you, Cisco. I'm going to switch a little bit. There's a data integrity flavor in this one, and I'm going to go start with Stephen and then to Ken on this one. Can we have a clarity on CSA applications and adoption, understanding the most current trends in data integrity assessments. You're on mute. We can't hear you. Okay, Ken, you want to start? Go ahead, Ken.
Sure. I mean, clarity on CSA implications and adoption. You know, that's kind of, well, look. What does CSA fundamentally boil down to? Critical thinking, the application of critical thinking on your construct and really looking at what you do. Then now, if you look at data integrity, really what data integrity is looking at, it is, you know, rather just narrowly looking at the life cycle of the system, it's life cycle of the data around that. That in itself reduces down to a series of requirements. So, I don't know if that's a conscious thing there. Okay. But anyway, that falls naturally down into requirements at which point you can apply CSA. And the key things on using like CSA is really, it is a common sense approach that's looking at the way that software engineering is done outside of the pharma space. Going back to the first questions on looking at DevOps and Agile. You've got organizations that we rely on that no longer have testers. That you're not going to see the training records or you're not going to see the metrics, yet we rely on them because we can see the robustness in their life cycles. And it is the same sort of thing here is when you're looking at it, once you know that regardless of what it is, I mean, this is data integrity, but you could say, you know, it's XYZ, whatever it is, it's going to boil down to a series of requirements. How does CSA fit into there? It is a common sense approach to verifying that. And one thing I want to just throw out there just for you guys to think about. If you go back early on and you start looking at, you know, origins of CSV, you'll go find out, if you go back far enough, that, you know, it was looking at process validation. So think about, you know, a business process. So we may come up with IQ, OQ, PQ. I know Cisco hates when I use those terms, but that's what they latched onto from process validation. Well, yeah. Well, think about the number of variables that you have in a process. Now think about, like, you know, you look at Office, it's got like, you know, 20 million lines of code. So you're going to say something that's got 20 million lines of code, that's something that's got maybe 100 parameters that you're saying that you're stipulating and controlling, and that's what you're scaling to take on 20 million. So think about it. This is where we need to actually, as industry, come with a process that works. This document that's on the screen right now is already, you know, GAMP is already out there for the people who are worried about this other on adoption in the first two, because really this is all about CSA adoption. PICS points to GAMP as best practices, right? The C in the CGXP space, right? What is current? That's approved, and PICS has, right, 50 inspectorates are members of PICS, including FDA, right? So you sit there and you look at it, it's like these guys are saying this is current best practices. It is okay to start adopting it. And back to this, it is okay, you look at it, you look at the life cycle for data integrity. Data integrity is one element, and then you start applying CSA within that space. And Stephen, are you back online?
I am. So I was going to
hurry up, Stephen, because he won't let you talk.
It really starts with an assessment, right? Like you said, not all data is created equal. We talked about this last time we got together, that the keystroke logging of everything, nobody's going to require that. And frankly, you're going to bring all your systems to their knees if you try to do something like that. Hey, Amazon would love it if you need the data storage, right? But you know, when you're going through and you're analyzing your requirements, figure out what data is so critical to the quality to merit that type of thing. And this could be a separate data integrity assessment. You could do this within the requirements assessment. All along, what we've talked about is when you're looking at your requirements, you're assessing them for the potential to impact patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. And when you're doing that data integrity exercise, so I say it all the time, data itself is dumb. It's meaningless until you map it to a function. For me, at most, it's an indirect impact. But when you map it to that function and how that data is getting used, and you can do this during the assessment, that's when it has risk. So if you find you have requirements with data associated with it that are so critical to the product quality that it merits something like keystroke, do the exercise then. Not all data is created equal. Right size your requirements to your build. It says it right here on the slide, data integrity by design.
Awesome.
Can I also add something to that? Because there's something interesting about that question, which is understanding the most current trends in data integrity assessments, right? Which always brings me back and seems to allude, at least from my eye, to the concern about what the regulator is going to say or what experiences they've had with the regulators, right, regarding data integrity.
Sure.
But I think you've heard it mentioned here by both Ken and Stephen. Data integrity, even when we were talking about it, and again, and Ken was here last time to discuss it, it's about the broad business process, right? It's that whole holistic look at your data. Somehow it's been driven to associate strictly only with the tool or the computer system activity that's relevant to that, and that's not where that whole process is intended to focus on, right? That is one aspect of assuring your broad data integrity, right? You could have the best system, you could have active keystroke logging of everything and still have a data integrity issue across the board in the spectrum. But even back to the point of consideration here, the idea of every keystroke being logged, that's a throwback to how things were captured in paper. To what Stephen said, if it's such a critical data point that it is relevant that you have keystroke mapping, then I go back to all the things that were said beforehand in critical thinking. Maybe you should consider even eliminating the idea of that keystroke need and capture the data directly, right? There's other ways when you've got that level of criticality to get the integrity assured that isn't about, capturing every keystroke along the way and putting an extra burden on the system, the operator, and everything else that goes on. It's really what we've been trying to highlight from a CSA standpoint. It's think through what's relevant for your process and that risk that it's entailed within that.
Awesome.
Data integrity isn't separate, right? It's not a separate exercise from your requirements. And I don't know why we often treat it like it's something different than everything else.
Absolutely.
I think
Thank you.
Hey, Colin, one last point. I mean, people bring it up just because, right? They look at the Gantt diagram on where it has a data lifecycle and the system lifecycle. I think it's being emphasized that way just because people have ignoring it, much like we're bringing out CSA because people haven't been applying the critical thinking and they've just been doing it. But end of day, everything, to your first point, Stephen, everything will reduce down to requirement. And when it hits the system, we were able to apply the CSA. And please don't do keystroke logging, guys. It's at the nature and not the transaction. You're never going to succeed, or you'll have very difficulty succeeding, and then you've engineered your whole approach wrong. Your business process is wrong if you're down to that keystroke log.
When I'm doing that functional requirement risk assessment, and if I come across a requirement that I've determined to be high risk or direct impact, then consider the data. Do I need to do anything more with the data there? Don't consider it separately.
Good point there. Thank you. All right, a little different flavor, I guess. This question is also going to Cisco. FDA views on equivalency expectations between paper and electronic records. Is that clear, that question?
Not sure. Is it really asking about us and expecting that if you are keeping a paper record in any way, shape, or form, that we expect that to exist in the exact same format in a digital activity?
I think so. In other words here, and my fear from that question is, do we do everything we did on papers? Do we do it electronically now? And I think that's probably my translation to it. But it's really, again, it goes back to inspectors. How would they view now data integrity electronic versus paper? So.
Yeah, and I think in some aspects to that question, there's some fairness in terms of what we need to do internally to work through and educate as we start moving more towards these tools, these technologies, the enabling that transition. So there's some fairness to it. I think what we want to avoid is getting into the trap of not necessarily, again, pushing back on what makes sense, right? If that's coming through and we're hearing that, then come to us, talk to us, tell us this is what you're saying, this is the impact it's having, so we can figure out if that's really the case and we need to adjust. Because that idea of that equivalency, we need to shift that mindset externally, and if we need to internally, but we need to know that's the case and it's happening, or else you're gonna fall into the same trap that happened even now with the CSA, right? As long as you are doing it, because that's the understanding that you've got from an industry standpoint, that's what we are going to accept because that's what you chose. And we're not here to dictate what's the best, the mechanism that's you're going to utilize. But the idea of the paper equivalency, I can tell you right now, is not exactly what we would expect in digital format, right? The idea of going to digital is to eliminate a lot of the potential errors, issues, and everything that we would see in a paper format. So keeping that same structure just in digital form, really defeats the purpose of the technology. It defeats the the efficiency of it, and it introduces the opportunities for more of those same errors in some way, shape, or form.
Well said. Well said. Gentlemen, any other comments on this?
It comes back down to the functional equivalency, right? Not the literal equivalency of the two. Right. So it's a functional equivalency such that I can rely on the data that's there. And this, we kind of touched on this on the last time around, right? By adopting technology, you get things like, when I enter the field, there could be a referential integrity check that's done programmatically in the system. As soon as I type in, maybe I fat fingered it and it goes like, hey, this record doesn't exist. And I can go back and I correct it in real time before that data is actually committed. See, the technology enables us to do much more than paper does. It enables us to avoid those issues. But those checks, if we start sitting there like, oh no, because you typed this originally, and that becomes the record, that's where people start getting into this fallacy, right? This is just like, I think, Stephen, you're equating it to, I'm thinking about this, but until I hit that submit, I haven't actually committed. It's that same granularity of transaction you use on everything. Right? If you're doing your mortgage online, you're filling that out, your banking, things that you rely on that you expect integrity, it's that same model. And we should not be sitting there putting these, because you're not hearing Cisco say like, hey, no, he wants us to use the technology. This will actually, if you think about what will make the data better, that is what agency really wants, right? What is better for patient safety or product quality? Is it all a bunch of useless data, or preventing us from adopting new and greatest technology, right? Because we create these self-imposed prisons. And
what's interesting,
Stephen,
you're literally, you guys are answering, you're answering 3 questions at the same time. They're all related. It's all that combination of data integrity and CSA. I'm running out of questions here, but here's a new one, I think. All right. How to best train and convey to employees who are not involved in the quality department on the importance of data integrity. I would like to take that.
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, now I need to repeat it. Great. How to best train and convey to employees who are not involved in the quality department on the importance of data integrity. I mean, quality is everyone, right? It's not just quality people.
I would start there personally. Like I said, I don't know what the best mechanism is, because honestly, this sounds like it's a cultural question within the organization, right? It's the same thing that we've been talking about with a lot of our case for quality activities, and building that idea of quality is everywhere and getting everyone to adopt that mindset. That idea of data integrity is key and fundamental to that understanding, right? So I think they go hand in hand with that cultural shift. It's just, you know, what's right for your organization and what's it take to get started and move in that.
Take it from the abstract and make it relevant, whether it's in their job position, their personal life. Use examples that make data integrity relevant to something they understand. You know, we do a lot of training with clients on CSA, CSV, data integrity, what is validation. And one thing we always emphasize is, you know, most of us are very indirectly involved in the product that's at the patient's bedside, right? And so we often forget, we're running a business, we often forget what we are doing is saving and sustaining lives. So you bring it back to the question of, would I use this product on a loved one, on my mother, my child, my husband, my wife? You know, make examples relevant and something that they can understand. And use examples of how incorrect data can snowball down and end up at the patient bedside.
Absolutely. All right. One question here about data integrity and how it applies to cell and gene therapies in clinical applications. That sounds like a Ken kind of question. Data integrity.
Ken for that one.
Data integrity and how it applies to cell and gene therapies and clinical applications.
These questions I'm finding fascinating. It's almost like there's implying that there's a difference. At the end of the day, it's right. What is the difference? Regardless, I mean, I could, you know, whatever the system is, whatever the data, the business process determines it. Whether it's like, you know, this whole notion on, I need to have integrity on the data that I use, regardless of the business process, or whether it's clinical, whether it's gene therapy, there's earlier examples. I need to be able to rely on that. Awesome. And that is the ultimate thing that drives everything, right? And so there is no difference per se in my mind, just because, like, you know, it's like saying, like, you know, how do I drive the car differently in Texas than I do in California? I mean, it's kind of like, right. I'm not quite following the question, because I don't think the question really is relevant. You apply when you look at it, you do the analysis the same way. You look at the requirements, you look at the point of failures, you look at the expectations, you look at what data is critical, you look at the data across its entire life cycle in the process of supporting. And when you think about it that way, it becomes more relevant and consistent.
Yep. So the follow-up question is like, can I apply CSA to clinical applications?
Clinical applications. Yeah. So I go back to the whole construct and concept of this, and I think I echo what Ken was just saying right now, right? CSA, all it is a resetting to tell you, here's all the things that you consider. This is what you can do, and start again from what is the intended use, what is your risk associated with that, and then how are you going to give yourself confidence that that's delivering what you need for you from a patient safety standpoint, and then from your organization standpoint. Can you use it in clinical applications? Is it applied to a tool that's used in the clinical application, or are you talking about, you know, the devices that are being evaluated under that clinical trial or study?
Take ETMS or something, yeah.
Right? You've got the same activity. There is no distinction between what the application is. It goes back to, you know, what's the data intended to do? And you need to rely on that data to make a decision that could impact safety or, you know, determining the efficacy of the product, especially for your own organization in order to be able to succeed. You need that data to be as reliable and trustworthy as possible. Apply the right methods to make sure that the system that you're utilizing gets you that level of confidence. And that's really what CSA is all about, right? So can it be applied? Absolutely. You know, just understand, back to, I think Stephen mentioned it beforehand, Ken said it multiple times, it's all about, you know, that intent for the data and what do you need to do to make sure it works and serves your purpose as what is oftentimes a source of truth, right, for your organization for a lot of things that move on from, that stem from there.
Great.
Just to add on to that, specifically coming from the clinical side, because I used to work in the e-clinical side, it's actually more relevant. CSA is more relevant in your toolkit on the clinic because time, right, for most of it. So you look like an IVR or an EDC system, you have to spin those things up in weeks. Right? It's not like the typical monolithic app, I'm going to do SAP, here's like, 2 years to do it. You got like 8 weeks or less to spin up a IVR system or an EDC system. Your timeline is way more constrained. So the value of the activities becomes more critical, and how you approach it is definitely more critical. So I think CSA dovetails nicely into the clinical space.
100%. One question is on risk assessment. Do all risks identified during risk assessment have to be mitigated, or can lower risk be considered acceptable?
No, you don't need to. So I always recommend for your higher risks, and if you're going to CSA 4 or 5 and a traditional FMEA, the high risk, that you look at mitigation strategies on those and that you verify those mitigation strategies work during your validation. Your low and your medium risk, no, it's not necessarily to mitigate them. It's to be aware of them.
Right, and I think
Any other thoughts?
the catch to all of this is, right, you're using the risk assessment to help determine what additional work or effort you need to drive to make sure that you've demonstrated the system's fit for your purpose, right? That's, this isn't like your traditional, and I think that comes from, what is applied in the 14971 and that aspect of things when you are looking at risk in that standpoint, right? Remembering again, even in 14971 says that software is one of those things that's it's binary. You're not having those issues. So you're either proving out that it works or it didn't work, and you're trying to figure out what failed here, and that's other aspects that CSA enables and does. So when we're looking at that risk activity, right, it's all about how much effort do you need to convey to give yourself the confidence that the system is fit for its purpose, right? There isn't a question of mitigation. Your whole process, oftentimes these tools are just one piece of a bigger process, is your mitigation for what happens to the product as it goes through the systems, right? It's not oftentimes these softwares are treated as if they're the sole indicator, determinator, and factor of, that product not resulting in a safety issue, and that's not the case, right? Oftentimes, they are just a portion of control or activity that's going on within the broader system that needs to be factored in that assessment. But when we talk about mitigations, it's, did it work or did it not work? There we go.
No, they're low for a reason. I mean, they're low risk, so they're low for a reason. If you're spending all your effort, and there are going to be a lot more of low risk, so then you get a priority inversion, right, where you spend all your time on the low risk areas instead of looking. For that question, since it sounds, because any risk, right, you can accept, you can mitigate, you can transfer, right? They're different strategies for that. For further reading, I think GAMP does a fair job on looking at risk both at the system level and at the requirements level. You go read M3. I do believe that if you would look at say the RAMP model, the RAMP model is quite good. It discusses the system level risk at a very high level. So to understand that the nature of the system, and understanding the nature of the system first, that dictates your level of effort and what the system does. So those are just further guidance for whoever asked that question.
Sounds awesome. My organization, go ahead.
The risk analysis exercise, it's supposed to foster critical thinking, right? Thinking about what could go wrong and what you'll do about it. If you create a procedure where you require a mitigation for everything, you're just going to get junk out. It's not going to add value. You can't do that type of dogmatic thinking. Risk is about trying to consider in advance what could go wrong and designing your system to make sure it doesn't happen.
Hey, Stephen, building off of that, right? I know this is always a free-for-all when you have problems shutting me up, and that's okay. If you look at risk, and itself, like when you do a risk-based approach, you've accepted the possibility of a miss. Right? You've accepted that, because I'm not going to test everything. I'm not going to do all the breadth, and I'm not going to go all the depth. So the problem that industry has is when they have a miss, they have a hard time accepting that if it's a miss in an area where I said like, hey, I'm not going to touch it, or hey, I'm not going to test it as deeply, you've already accepted that risk. Where industry gets in trouble is they like, oh, we have a miss in production, therefore it's like, it's a huge deviation, I got to do a CAPA. And then they go out, and so then they augment their stack of testing, and so it's no longer risk-based, it becomes like this, it becomes high. So now, to Stephen's point, I do the risk assessment, and then I got to test everything. So then what was the point? And it becomes just like, then we're in this cycle, it's just a cycle. So I want people to think about risk. If you accepted that risk when you're doing it, you're accepting the possibility of a miss. The point is that that point in time is like, it's not the failure of the validation program per se, right? It is now we have to correct it, figure out how do we address it and look holistically, because there's so many one-offs. So you're saying that validation is going to capture everything. You're never going to get there. You're going to get stacks and stacks of screenshots. The purpose of testing is to reduce the number of issues. And then you have other business processes to catch these things. No different than a manufacturing technician, making an incorrect operation on the plant floor, right? I certainly don't say, oh, this is no longer, this process is no longer validated, right? I mean, it's that we have a weird, in the validation space, we have weird constructs. I'm just gonna be honest about that, because I started my career in manufacturing. And if you put the constraints that I do in CSV on the manufacturing floor, no way. And that manufacturing, I'm sorry, that is direct. That is the product.
Right.
That's patient. Patient.
Yeah.
Here's an exercise for you guys to try. Next time you're doing your risk analysis, step away from the requirements document first. Have a conversation with the BPO and the SO. It's what I used to call the 3 a.m. conversation. You're getting a new clinical system. You're getting a new med info system, documentate, whatever it is. Have a conversation with them. What is keeping you up at night? What are you afraid that could really go wrong in this? And you'll find some really interesting conversations come out of that you're thinking of it holistically rather than requirement by requirement. Hey, I gave this example last week to someone, real world, it was just a training system where the production supervisor said, if I can't generate that training report every morning, production stops. I don't know who's gowning qualified. I need to make sure I have some type of mitigation for that, right? Was there a requirement specifically for that? No, it would have been missed. So have those conversations. That's what risk is supposed to do.
And actually, and in that sense, right, you were talking about that mitigation for that process. Was there anything that would have been done differently for the validation of the tool that generates that report?
There wasn't, but there was a mitigation created to ensure that there was a backup to another system that could pull a report.
Right.
Yep.
So Stephen, what do you think of infrastructure FMEA?
Well, I'd like to know how different one system is to the next. It's a really heavy-handed process to do an infrastructure FMEA. If you are going to do it, have one document for all of your infrastructure, because your risks aren't going to change from system to system. I'd rather see people focus their efforts on thinking about the risks in the application than in hardware.
Any comments from Cisco or Ken on this?
I would agree with that also.
Yeah, I think just to abstract it a little far up, one level up, we spend too much time, like, in the infrastructure, especially now, things change. We need to keep up with the hackers, right? We need to keep up with the cybersecurity risks. So if we're constantly trying to put our historic slow controls on infrastructure, you're not going to get there. right? You're not going to get there. We need to be able to move more nimbly, because what ends up happening is you delay the patching, which is actually worse for product quality and data integrity and patient safety, right? So what you need to do is, like, you need to look at things holistically. You need to look at, say, rather than like point in time qualifications of infrastructure, you start looking at, infrastructure as code. And then if I run that same code, right, because everything is now virtual, and I run it consistently, do I need to qualify it? I would argue no, because hey, when I deploy it in a different environment, it's the same, right? It's, when you look at the qualification process, it's because someone can make a mistake. Someone could fat finger it. That's why in different, like, oh, they're configuring it, they misconfigure it. But if it's always the same configuration, you can abstract this up to an application. Then it's a matter of controlling the code. I run the same code in my sandbox. I run the same code in my Val environment. I run that same script in production. It's the same thing. It's identical because the code configured it. So at that point in time, do I really need that? Do I need that? Right? It's by exception at that point in time. Right.
So Ken, I'm going to stop you here because I got a response to you and a question. Normally I agree with Ken, yet FDA is at my facility and the inspector does not agree with global system for data collection. What the vendor calls something reprocessed to generate a report, waters and power, and a potential observation noted with 3 digits, and we have processes. It is the option. What does Cisco say to this? Oh, okay.
I don't even understand
that
the
all
question.
written down somewhere? Because I'm following that one.
Yeah.
Question?
It sounds like it's a data lake type of system.
You want me to read it again? I can read it again.
Yeah, go for it, please.
All right. So normally I agree with Ken, but yet the FDA is at my facility and the inspector does not agree with a global system for data collection. What the vendor called something reprocessed to generate a report like waters or power, and a potential observation noted with 3 digits, and we have processes. It is his opinion. What does Cisco say to this?
So again, first thing to note on all this, and we try to make sure it's clear for people. So you have an observation, right? That's not, again, that's not a citation. It's not a warning letter, right? It is a note. It's something that the
3 digits, 483 probably.
an investigator observed, and that's perfectly fine, right? That's what the investigator is there to do. In these situations, you have the opportunity afterwards to ask for, more clarity, or in these cases, even come and engage somebody from one of the centers to help out with the discussion around that observation, right? That observation doesn't necessarily translate into, a warning letter or a broader citation. In these cases, especially since this is something that these new technologies, this new look at data and everything else, it's going to take time to get through the system, get through everybody up to date and up to speed on it. These are going to happen. Come and use the extra resources the agency offers. Talk to us, ask for them to maybe consult somebody from our digital health team, especially if it's within the medical device space. But I think even without the medical device space, they can ask for that extra assistance and guidance from that.
Thank you, sir. Another question. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through the questions. How do we begin the implementation of CSA? Writing a master validation plan saying that CSV will not be more used. Convincing the high direction, identify critical data in production. So in other words, really, and I think this probably can go to Stephen and then Ken, how do we begin the implementation of CSA? Do we write a massive validation plan saying we're transitioning from CSV or there will not be any more CSV?
Try it out. Choose computer system. Do a pilot study, right?
Pilot study. Yep.
Show your quality organization. Sometimes even your validation organization is the one that's resistant. Show your management. Do it under a pilot study. Show the good results that come out of it. Once you get the results out of that pilot study, then you can start revising your procedures, right? You don't you date for a little while before you marry.
All right. Cisco, any comments on this?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Ken.
Yeah, you know what? I would do it at the plan level. For us, what we did was we did a retrospective analysis of systems, and we said like, hey, had we taken this approach, would we have a miss? And we determined that no, we would not have a miss. And then we started piloting it. And I've got multiple quality assurance units, and we're at different states throughout the organization. But one of the things is CSA is just bringing thoughts. It's still validation. I mean, it's a view of it, but the end result is CSA. Whether you want to call it John or Jonathan, I don't. It doesn't matter. In the end, the end goal is the same. And it's no different than any other process. You don't go big bang on a new process. You bring it in a controlled and structured fashion.
I think
CSA
just hit on
is
what
validation.
exactly. What was that?
CSA is validation. And the reason we keep saying CSA versus CSV is we want to shift people's thinking away from, there's a kind of baggage that goes with the word validation, but it's still validation, guys. Whether you call it CSA or CSV, it's still the end result's the same.
There is no migration from CSV to CSA,
Right.
and you ignore CSV. Cisco?
I think you guys hit on every point perfectly right there, right? It's still meeting the intent of that requirement from a regulatory standpoint, right? All we're saying with CSA, and the reason why we even chose to talk about it as CSA, was it enables that just enough of a process shift in people's minds to start thinking through and not getting locked down into what they've already done, right? This is stuff that, again, you could create completely differently. You could just build right into your current processes and just shift them away in that direction because it's still validation.
So I see Chris is here. That means we have 3 minutes. So I have 2 questions, and I think one of them to Cisco. How are you planning to ensure regulatory agencies alignment globally?
So again, we'll start the point here, but from a global standpoint, you're going to find that those who follow like the ISO 13485 standard, at the very least from an FDA standpoint, already have the language in there that says, as appropriate, the efforts should be scaled appropriate with the risk of the activity for computer system validation. That's littered throughout the 1345 standard. This is not out of sync with that and not out of alignment with that activity. And again, the big benefit to all this is it gives you the tools to speak the language that's relevant for any investigator or auditor, right? And that's all that matters. It's all about that risk discussion. And the companies who've implemented this, who have gone through the ISO 13485 in audits, they've flown through completely with even positive feedback in terms of what they were doing and how to discuss things.
And Ken, do you want to just say something about the CSA appendix and who reviewed it?
Yeah, so the CSA appendix, I mean, Cisco was one of the reviewers. I mean, if you look at the data integrity guidance, just look at the front. We have reviewers from MHRA, TGA, and FDA. Again, I will go back down to GAMP deferring to PICS. A PICS deferring to GAMP as representing current, best practices in the CSV space. To that first question, CSA, so Stephen pointed out, CSA is CSV. Right, so it is already here, and you should be able to have again, scope and application, documented, justified rationale. To that earlier question, who said they sometimes agree with, I reread your question. I don't quite follow your question, so hit me on LinkedIn or hit the FICSA team, and we can understand the nuance, because there's too much ambiguity in that question to really answer it. But I think whatever you do here, taking a step back, guys, when you're looking at this, it's all about thinking more than anything else and bringing in, making sure whatever you do is value added. That you're not just doing it because you think it's a perceived compliance issue, right? And then when you do it that way, then you're able to defend what you did because it makes sense. And there's different ways that you can defend. You can go into the system in production, say that, yes, that functionality is working. I can show you the audit trail. All right,
I'm going to cut you off, Ken, because we're going to, I would like to have a last word. Actually, question was going to go to Cisco, but I'm going to cut it off. The question was, what happens to a company if they don't do CSA? My answer is, keep spending money. Cisco?
I think that's the thing.
I'll give you the last word.
With that, right? Companies can choose to do whatever they like, and this is not telling you that you need to do this. This is not going to be a new regulatory requirement. The idea here is, can we reset everything so it brings value back and focus it the right way? That's entirely, the choice is up to you as an individual company to implement or not, or take advantage of it. Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I think we need to do this more often, and maybe over a drink. But thank you all so much. Chris, back to you.
Thank you all.
Again, for those questions we couldn't get answered, we apologize. We will follow up with you individually to do that. And heck, maybe we'll have Cisco in a part 3 along with Ken and Steven to go through those other questions that you asked today. So again, thank you very much for your time. Cisco from the FDA, thank you for being part of our panel today. Ken, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Steven and Cal, thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.